Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our friend, Zvi Band! There you go. There you go. How's it going, Zvi?
Doing great.
All right.
Doing this on? Can you imagine if the real cheer was actually weaker than the practice one? That'd be really depressing.
I would actually just put you back in the middle and redo it.
Forget it, I'm over. Hey everyone.
Hey.
Happy Tuesday.
So hey man, thanks for coming out here, man. It's quite an honor to have you out here, especially after all the successes you had. So we always like to start off on a personal note, like we'll go way back, right? So tell us where you're born, where you're raised, what your parents do, and possibly maybe talk about your first entrepreneur experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's all of I have different answers for all of those.
Okay.
So I was born in Boston, while my parents were both grad students. I was raised mainly in Southern California, well, first Berkeley and then San Diego. I know every time I meet someone who's still in San Diego, they're like, why are you in DC? Go back to San Diego, it's beautiful. But grew up in San Diego, moved to the DC area around 20 years ago. My father was an astrophysicist and my mother is an artist. My first entrepreneurial journey, I'd probably say I definitely was the kid that somehow was able to convert losing my parents thousands and upon thousands of dollars taking apart the family computer over and over again to getting paid to build computers for other people in the neighborhood. This was back in a time where like it seemingly was still a good idea to like go to like some Micro Center or CompUSA or some kind of place like that and buy a bunch of random computer parts and put them together, and you can actually make a working computer instead of just going to the Apple store and just buying one off the shelf. So that's probably my first venture. I maybe made like $200 total, but damn, it's worth it.
So you say you were born in Boston?
Yes.
You a Patriots fan?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm not an anything fan. If anything, I mean, my wife is an Eagles fan, and they're an Eagles family.
Got it.
My daughter, at 1.5 years old, she learned how to scream at the TV during Eagles games. So if anything, I'm like not a football fan.
Got it.
So yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. So we wanted to, before we go into the Contactually story, we always try to get some bits before you start your company. You had a company, Skivvies Arts.
Skivvies Arts.
Skivvies?
Skivvies.
Okay, what does that mean?
So Skivvies, it was a friend of mine in 5th grade just randomly started calling me that, and it really stuck.
Yeah.
And then this was also like this was kind of in the 90s, and then kind of going into like 2000 when people were setting up their like AOL screen names for the first time. I was like, oh, let me just use this nickname. And it stuck, and I still haven't been able to change my Twitter handle away from it. And so there are people who like still don't really know my real name and still just call me Skivvies.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you created this, it was pretty much you. It's a dev shop, right? And in fact, there's probably people in this room who are was your past clients, where you were a full stack developer, and might I add, probably one of the best ones in this area. So how did that give you a perspective of when you finally decided to start your own company? Did it give you a pretty unique perspective?
Yeah, so just let me get to the punchline. A lot of things that I talk about end up tying back to relationships. No surprise, I happen to write a book about it. But in all seriousness, I'm actually someone who doesn't really, or at least used to not believe in relationships at all as an important thing. My first job out of college, I was working for one of the big government contractors, and I remember getting invited to new hire networking events and thinking that was the dumbest thing in the world. My job is just to go, sit in a cubicle and write code and, eventually get promotions, and that's it. There are a few other twists and turns in my career, but that consulting firm actually resulted from me abruptly leaving a job, like literally 3 p.m. in the afternoon, sent an email, closed laptop, never looked at it again. Not necessarily having any prospects or knowing what to do. There's a lot of really tough stuff going on in my family at the time, and I did the only thing I knew how to do, which is reach out to my friends that I had built over the previous few years and said, hey, I'm on my own. I'm looking for some consulting work, anything that you can do. And within a few hours, I had a friend reach out to me saying, hey, my dad's construction company is looking for a website and looking to get set up on Gmail. Another person said, hey, I'm actually bidding on a contract right now and we need another developer. And it kind of snowballed from there. And over the next few years, we started working with the likes of Ford and CBS and Volkswagen, and it really all came via relationships.
And so before we go on to the Contactually story here, I just want to make sure that on Twitter, #StartupGrind, Skivvis.
We're good. Anyone who knows me, anything with a Z or an S, I usually respond to, so we're good.
At SKEEVIS, or you can do @Contactually.
Yes.
Okay, good. So he's going to drop some pretty good nuggets here. So let's go to the Contactually idea, the startup. So what was the aha moment? Like, tell us, when did you decide I'm going to do this? I'm going to dedicate my life for the next 5, 6, 10 years to do this. What was the aha moment for Contactually?
Yeah, so we're all friends here, so I'm just going to be completely transparent with all of you in terms of the thinking behind it. I can go into the story in terms of why I'm passionate about this idea and the origin of it, but also there's, and I think we should be completely open with talking about why I wanted to go into this type of business in general. So I was running a services business before this. Skivvis Arts, our model was we would partner with design agencies, bigger companies, other firms, and we would basically do a lot of their real heavy-duty software development, iPhone applications, WordPress sites, all sorts of different things that they couldn't necessarily do in-house. And all of it came via relationships, and it was a great business. But at the same time, I started getting kind of burnt out on it, and I started seeing people I know go off and create products and build really cool companies. And I basically kind of started thinking to myself, I didn't want to get paid anymore to build other people's dreams. I wanted to build one of my own. I knew obviously it was a big risk. I had just gotten engaged. I told my fiance, now wife, hey, by the way, this really great income stream, I'm going to burn that. But as for the origin idea behind Contactually, like I've mentioned a couple times, all of the great things in my career up until then happened not necessarily because I was good at what I did. I think nowadays that's really table stakes. What mattered is I had the right reputation and the right relationships and the right people knew me. And so I saw this was an incredible thing. At the same time, I wasn't very good at it. Again, I'm actually a pretty introverted person. I didn't necessarily know how to connect and how to relate to people, and like most human beings, I'm pretty bad at it. I'd meet someone for coffee and 2 weeks later completely forget about them. I was so focused, luckily business was good, and I was so focused on the top of my inbox that I wouldn't engage with anyone on page 2 or page 3. My past clients, leads I'd reached out to 2 or 3 weeks before. So I was missing out on all these amazing opportunities. And so I said, well, this is something that theoretically I should start really thinking business process-wise about. Tried using every CRM on the market, Highrise, Sugar CRM, Salesforce, and all of them really made me do more work. And I didn't want to necessarily have a tool that made me do more work. I wanted to have a tool that actually helped me in some way. And so I came up with this idea randomly. I remember May 15th, 2011, wrote down in Evernote the idea of a proactive CRM. Like, why couldn't you have a CRM that helped you instead of you putting information into it? And I kind of wrote down a couple points, like why can't it scan your email inbox to figure out who you're talking to, automatically add it to your CRM? And so that was the original origin idea. So I think it's, again, both the problem space that you should be interested in, but also the business model.
So really it was like, I mean, everybody has email pains, right? And they're like, oh, I forgot about that person, right? Like, somebody wrote you an email, you like, it drops all the way down, and it's like, oh crap, I totally forgot to reply to that guy, right? And it was pretty important. That was kind of like the big pain point you were solving.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for different industries. But what's really interesting is that, this is a pervasive problem, right, throughout any industries. And so when you were first doing this, like, because right now, like, you guys are pretty much like, you kind of locked the real estate business, right, in real estate CRM.
Yeah.
What was the other industries that you were looking at, and why did it stick with real estate?
Yeah. To be honest, so yes, like, I think, one thing that we started seeing early on is we started doing customer development. And by customer development, I mean literally like asking my friends and colleagues, some of whom are in this audience, like, hey, I have this idea, what do you think about it? And the general attitude was like, hey, yeah, like, we like it, good idea. I've learned more about like how to properly handle that in the future. But in general, like, I had this belief that this could apply to multiple industries. And so when we initially started, we were thinking more just general CRM. Like, we looked at, again, Highrise and Salesforce and Sugar CRM and all of these CRMs that you see out there. And they're generally like, market agnostic. They'll work in any market. It was later on in Contactually, and we can talk about that, about how and why we focus on real estate.
So talk about maybe so we're all startups here. I'm assuming like half of the people here. They're working on their prototype, right?
Yeah.
And so, what did your first prototype look like? I mean, how did you get that? I mean, you obviously wrote it yourself, right? Because you're a developer, right? You had to like hack something up together first and then kind of test it out, right?
Yeah, so myself and one of my co-founders at the time hacked it together over the course of a couple weeks. Spoiler alert, it was terrible. It was, so what actually did was, and it's very different from the Contactually that you could sign up for today. What we would do is we would scan your email inbox, and every time we identified a new contact, someone that we didn't recognize before, we would send you an email saying, hey, we saw you just emailed, like, Brian Park. Tell us more about him, and you would reply in a few lines like, all right, this is a little bit about him, this is how I met him, here are a few tags, here's the next step follow-up action. So you'd send that email back to us, and then we would, do some crazy parsing, and then, add it to a CRM. And no surprise, that was really annoying. Like, imagine, when you first set this up, the CRM doesn't know any of your contacts. So literally every time you send an email for the next few weeks, it's emailing you and making you do more work. So we actually doubled the amount of work that you had to do. And it got really annoying, and people started literally people who were using it literally started marking our product as spam. From that, at least the thing I'm most thankful for is at least started a conversation with people. Through that, we learned, okay, we really hate this, but we love the web-oriented part. We're not going to add this information via email, but we love the fact that you're following emails, and we like to have that. Even back then, we started doing this thing where if we saw you hadn't engaged with someone every in a 3-week period, and it was hard coded to be 3 weeks, we would then, say, hey, by the way, you should follow up with Brian Park. It's been 3 weeks and 2 days. Right. And people hated that, but then they said, well, we think about our network as buckets. And buckets, and I organize my people into buckets, and I like to stay in touch with people, in different time spans for different buckets. And that's now a core part of our product, even nowadays. So it came from really good customer development, just in repeating that loop over and over again.
Okay. And so before I go into the next scenario where, now you're rapidly growing, you guys got into 500 startups. So that was really at the beginning, right? When you guys were still prototyping. And so one of the things that I always look at, especially when I bring companies here, is what are some of the things that are pretty exceptional, right? So getting into YC, getting into 500, that's pretty exceptional. It's very rare. Tell us the secret. How did you, did you have to sort of hustle for that business, meet the Dave, or I think it was Paul at that time? Did you have to hustle for that business to get in? What was that whole process like?
Yeah, again, no surprise, it ties back to relationships. Yep. So Paul Singh, DC Tech OG, who some of you may know or have heard of, he's still in the area. I had known him for a couple years before, just again, local community, we'd hung out. He had accepted a role at 500 Startups. I happened to be in the Bay Area just for a bunch of client meetings, and so I was posting up there for the week. Reached out to Paul and said, hey, listen, we'd love to catch up. And at that time, like, all we had with Contactually was a prototype. I think it wasn't even Contactually back then. It was a different name we had before. And so we, and so I was meeting with him, and I showed him the prototype just by chance, and he said, Zvi, like, one, you should focus on this full time, and two, I'll fund you for it. And again, to this day, like, every investor that we brought on, the 12 million plus that we raised, came via relationships.
Right.
And so I think even nowadays, when people ask how do I raise money, I always equate it back to just it's about building relationships.
And so, did you think it was worth it, like going through that program, the accelerator?
Yeah, I definitely recommend, I think, the incubator experience for most entrepreneurs. Again, I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve out of it. I think for us, what was really helpful early on was it was the forcing function. Like, it was, myself, my two co-founders, we had jobs, rents, dogs, apartments, partners of different sorts. And to go from that comfortable living in Washington, D.C. to being in Mountain View for 4 months, doing nothing but working 18 hours a day, going home and sleeping for 6 hours in an apartment that, no joke, again, startup style, was nothing but some cheap mattresses on the floor and a table that we bought from IKEA. That was it for 4 months. And so it's that kind of forcing function that was really critical for us. Again, I think I don't necessarily say that everyone should go through an incubator. It's about going in and getting out what you want of it. So for us, like we also joined a much later stage incubator when we were after our Series A. That was meant for later stage companies. And again,
what was that one?
That was called Modern Ventures. Is an accelerator for real estate technology companies. And that was incredibly helpful for us. And again, they had a demo day and things like that. We completely ignored that because what we were looking for at the time is, hey, we're trying to accelerate relationship building in the industry. And we wanted to make sure that we could leverage their relationships to build more notoriety. And it was very successful. So, I don't think that necessarily everyone should just go do an accelerator. And if you are, don't just kind of stumble into it and just kind of follow the process. Instead, be very specific around what you're trying to achieve and be damn sure that you get that out.
You mentioned about your co-founders. I wanted to go back to that. So one of the things that I always get asked about for Startup Grind, it's like, hey Brian, where can I find my co-founders? And I'm like, it's co-founders are kind of like trying to find like a wife, right? And you just can't just say, hey, you just can't like just do it overnight, right? You can't find a co-founder and just expect that it'll take a couple of days. So what's sort of like your relationships that you have with your co-founders? Did you have prior like work history? Like, tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did you find? Where's the best place to find co-founders?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I have very limited experience, with a few companies. Contactually being the biggest one that we've started so far. So one of my co-founders, Jeff, he actually I met him through Proudly Made in DC, which was a marketing site that I created with a few others to help kind of bolster the entrepreneurial community here in DC. This was back like 2009, 2010. It was on the front page of the New York Times, and it really showed people that, hey, there is a startup community in the DC area. And so it got a lot of people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm moving to DC or I'm in DC and I'd love to get involved in startups. At the same time, I was looking for, my company was growing. I was looking for a developer, and beautiful, Jeff Carbonella reaches out saying, hey, I'm just moving to the DC area, I'm a developer such and such, and I'm looking for a job. And I'm like, perfect. So he ended up working for me for a few months at Ski Arts, and when the idea for Contactually came about, he helped me build the very first version of that. And then Tony, my other co-founder and COO, he and I had actually met through the local tech community. Literally, he, and one thing I credit him for, he's incredibly good at just kind of, cold emailing people that he thinks are interesting. And so he'd reach out to me just literally out of the blue saying, hey, I'm just looking to get involved in the community, would love to meet people. He and I met for coffee a couple times. Again, this was just as I was starting the idea, and I happened to show it to him, and he was like, hey, interesting, I've got some extra time. And so he started helping us out with customer development, providing feedback on the website. And so it kind of just started slow rolling from there up until we got the offer from 500 startups. And it was kind of a couple days of very intense debate among the three of us. And it resulted in us saying, hey, we're quitting everything else, burning the boats, and focusing on nothing but Contactually.
And so now that you're running Contactually, so that's like midway before your acquisition. Tell me, what was there a moment where you're just like, I don't know if this is, because they always talk about the roller coaster, right? Where there was almost like a near-death experience. Did you guys ever experience that with Contactually? I didn't ask that question before, but is
the question how many times that happened, or how many times per day did that happen?
Got it. Okay, got it. Let's give us an example.
I can give specific examples, but the one of the things that I really struggled with, and after our acquisition, I've kind of done a lot of soul searching on, is I basically spent 7.5 years in survival mode. And really just barely thinking that we were barely able to make it. I was incredibly stressed out at all times. And I think this is unfortunately a common thing that founders go through. But I was really in survival mode for the whole time. There were definitely a number of experiences. It depends on kind of whether it was in reality or whether it was just in my head, right? Every time we had a really great employee just kind of resign, I was like, oh, cool, that's it, we're dead. Everyone else is going to follow out the door. Great. Every time, there were definitely a few times where we got to 6 to 8 months or 6 to 8 weeks, of cash in the bank, and we're like, oh, cool, we're screwed, it's over. But we always seem to find it through and make a way, and I think in part it was because we surrounded ourselves with a number of good mentors that as much as we were panicking, freaking out, they were like, yeah, this is totally fine, don't worry. You haven't seen nothing yet if you believe this is bad. And I think we just kind of maintained that no matter what. We would always persist. I remember one time very early on, I was, being CEO, I was the one of the three of us who was tasked with fundraising. And I remember we were desperately needy of raising capital, and I got two investor rejections in the span of 2 hours, completely broken. I was like, oh, let me go to the gym and work out and just kind of, I'll feel better after that. Went to the gym, came back, got a third investor rejection. I was like, fine, screw this, I'm gonna go to sleep. Woke up and then kind of had an investor accept, right, and say and move forward with us, right? So there were always kind of those periods of time in the same day, sometimes without anything actually changing.
So 7.5 years going survival mode. Now you get acquired. So I'm going to ask about the whole arc of how those discussions about getting acquired, because it just doesn't happen overnight. It eventually happens, right? So would you say you're not in survival mode now? You're relaxing a little bit more?
A little bit more,
okay.
Right? I mean, I think I'm still, a little bit neurotic about making sure, Contactually and the team is successful within this greater organization, and I really want to make sure Compass, which acquired us, is as successful as possible. So yeah, while I may not be in the driver's seat and I don't have necessarily all the neuroses associated with that, I definitely still feel a little bit of that.
So let's talk about okay, so the acquisition happened. So let's just rewind. How many months or years previous of when either there was a phone call that came to you, or you just met the president? Describe that whole process. Where did that begin? Because obviously this is a marriage, right? When you guys are merged, how did you guys meet?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people think, and hearing the story, a lot of people think that it was just, a phone call at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night from the CEO, just, me in my pajamas, just, him just calling me directly out of the blue saying, hey, we've heard a lot of good things about you guys and we'd love to talk about, potentially acquiring you. And so that did happen, but of course, what is often left out is, what happened in like the months and years before. So Compass, if you haven't heard of them, big real estate technology company, has raised over $1 billion in funding, just on an incredible growth tear. They're founded 5-6 years ago. We had first heard about them back when they were Urban Compass. Actually from our users. So one of our big markets that we ended up focusing on was residential real estate agents. And for them, again, everyone knows that relationships are the most important. For a real estate agent, it is the most important thing. 88% of buyers say that they'd work with their agent again, but only 12% actually do use that same real estate agent. And so there are all these fundamental issues when it comes to relationship building that we set out to solve. So we ended up focusing on residential real estate as our main market. And through that, we end up working with a lot of very tech-savvy agents, many of whom end up getting recruited over to Urban Compass, which then became Compass. And so they had heard about us for a while. At one point, we saw that 20% of Compass agents were customers of ours. So as they were seeking to build out a technology platform, we were looking at them saying, hey, well, we'd love to bring you on as a customer. And so what we learned in hindsight was that they just hired a new head of product, and he was tasked with building a CRM. And turns out that he kind of openly said to the CEO, well, why don't you look at Contactually? That's really great. And I actually met Robert, the co-founder and CEO, at an event at 1776. No surprise. Again, I was trying to build a relationship with him. He and I stayed in touch. And that resulted in him just kind of feeling comfortable enough to randomly call me. I was saying, oh, I know the Contactually guys. I know Zvi. And he had no problem reaching out, and we already had that rapport. That was back in 2017. We obviously weren't acquired into 2019, but through that we were able to build up a long enough relationship over time that when it came to, again, the actual marriage, where we got to the actual letter of intent to buy the company, we were very confident that this was going to be a great partnership.
Yeah, because when you hear these things, you're like you have no idea what's going in the background. So I mean, well, it's like there's literally like a dozen or 24 like touch points that are happening in order for this to culminate into an acquisition, right?
Yeah, I mean, our focus for years is we wanted to bring them on as a customer, and we were working with hundreds of their agents, and we had built up a really great relationship, and they weren't interested in necessarily buying any technology at the time. So we were focusing purely on them just being kind of a sales opportunity that we said, hey, we'd love to just kind of work further. We were working with a lot of their competitors in the industry. And so, obviously they had different ideas, but luckily, again, we had focused for a long period of time on just building a relationship regardless of timeline, and it resulted to where we are today.
So what do you make that decision of like, hey, we're not gonna sell ourselves, we're gonna keep on continuing, maybe go IPO, like what's kind of going through your mind? Like, and what sort of like formulas are you putting through your head to say, no, I think I want to sell it versus, say no?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there was no necessarily like one point where we said, hey, we're going to sell, or hey, we're not. Like even the week before the deal closed, we're still going like, do we still want to do this? Is this still the right thing? Every time we got some red lines back, we're like, maybe we don't want to go through this. My co-founder is great. He's incredibly analytical. He had an Excel spreadsheet for everything, and he had modeled out all the different, scenarios. Yes, Nicole, I know you're familiar with that. But in truth, like for me, I was just thinking about, of the options on the table, what's the best one? Obviously, like for me, being 7.5 years in survival mode, I was necessarily ready for a change. I learned an incredible amount through that experience, but I was feeling I was kind of starting to tap out on my learnings at Contactually. And so, we knew that there was going to be some kind of step change necessary, in order for us to invest further in R&D, in order for us to grow the team, in order for my role to be vastly different. And so, yeah, I mean, for us, it did come down to like, all right, do we keep running as is and kind of hit profitability and that's it? Do we raise more capital, take on more dilution, but raise more capital to keep growing the business and think about this exit in another 3 to 5 years, or do we take one of the offers on the table? And we kind of really were honestly like the whole process, start to finish, the real acquisition process took around 6 months. Throughout the whole process, we were still kind of openly debating what it was. At the end of the day, we opted that, hey, the best thing for our team, our customers, our shareholders, our employees, our vision was to join forces with Compass.
So before I go into questions about your book, I wanted to ask you, with Compass, where do you see Contactually/Compass in the next 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, so Compass is, and obviously I'm not here as an official representative of Compass, but Compass over the next few years, I think there's real estate is one of those incredible industries where it is both incredibly huge, right? Real estate is the biggest asset class in the world. There's $20 billion paid out in just commissions alone, just in the United States every year. So it's this incredible business. But when you think about the flip side, it's still this incredibly emotional transaction, right? It's still a buyer or seller kind of wondering like, is this the right move? Not just is this the right business decision, but is this the right move for my family? Is this going to make or break us? And so you need real estate agents. You need that human touch to help you guide through it. Obviously, there's really great entrants that are kind of coming on and saying, hey, well, we can buy your property, close and money in hand within 30 days guaranteed. And I think there will definitely be options available, but Compass believes that if they take the absolute best agents in the industry, give them the best tools and build the best consumer experience, they can create something that's really world changing. And so I love that vision. Obviously, Contactually, we were a product that kind of fits into that vision. Again, being a siloed product, focusing just on CRM. Now we have the opportunity to really rethink what the technology landscape looks like. So obviously, I think I actually have every hope that as Compass grows and grows and grows, the vision of Contactually will stay the same, but how it's represented in the product will be completely different. I always said this to our team that if our product looks the same way it does in 5-10 years from now, we will have failed incredibly. And so luckily, our team has kind of adopted that charter, and we are again ground up thinking about, well, what does it mean to build relationships?
So what does it mean to build relationships? And that's a good segue to your book. It's really interesting because Contactually, it's a CRM, customer relationship management. I don't know how our audience here, CRM, customer relation
Address
manager.
book on steroids, basically.
Yeah. And it's great because in the real estate, as you just said, that's totally built on relationships, right? Yeah, you can find a realtor to sell your home, but sometimes people like certain realtors and they just love them and they feel very comfortable and sell their $500,000 or $1 million house, right? So this is really good. So I guess the question would be, you would actually be the perfect person to write a book on relationships and how to build multi-billion-dollar industries, right? Built on relationships. So tell us, what was the why? Why did you decide to write a book on this? Yeah,
so there are a couple of reasons. Again, like everything, I wish I could say, oh, it's because I just so believe in the vision. I just want to get this out there. Yes, that's a big part of it. In truth, one of our strategies that we pursued at Contactually, and we knew that we weren't necessarily competing with other products. Like our biggest competitor, even nowadays, even at Compass, is still someone using an Excel spreadsheet or nothing at all. And so we really knew that we had to focus on proving people why they needed to do something, right? Why they needed relationships, or why they needed to apply strategies and tools behind relationships. And so we really looked at them as role models. We looked at what HubSpot did. HubSpot basically convinced the industry that inbound marketing was something that you need to take seriously. And now any company that doesn't practice inbound marketing in some way is, probably no longer in business. And so they were incredibly successful. And so what they did is they, heavily emphasized and really drove home a lot of thought leadership. One of the tools they used was a book. And so throughout Contactually's history, we did as much as we could to drive thought leadership. Again, I'm an introverted software developer, but I found myself speaking on stages at real estate conferences and marketing conferences all the time, because we wanted to push our mission and our vision, not necessarily our product, but really convince people why they needed something like our product in the hopes they would drive to it. And so the idea for a book came about in 2015. As we kind of started really thinking about it though, what we realized is that one of the biggest challenges we faced with Contactually is that people would learn how to use our product. They didn't necessarily often have the strategies behind using our product. Meaning we would teach people how to open up our composer and send an email to their contacts. But they'd say, okay, so well, what do I say? And or we had these bucket reminders that would allow you to set intervals at which point you should follow up with people in your sphere. And they'd be like, okay, cool. So how often should I follow up with people in my network? And we realized, okay, with Contactually, what we had done is we were giving a chef's knife to someone who oftentimes didn't necessarily know how to cook. And so we really needed to push that best practices, not on how to use our software, but how to grow their business via relationships. And so again, there are many manifestations behind that, but one of the things that ended up resulting is hey, could we collect all these things into a book?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the book, you had this thing called capital strategy. Would you like to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7?
I actually didn't know how many letters that was, too, so thanks for counting.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we developed is, and obviously using the mnemonic as a handy device, was really just understanding through Contactually how the best relationship builders were doing it. What was the strategy? So starting with the C in capital, so consistency, making sure that you're acting with consistency on a regular basis, which means that if you were to go home tonight and reach out to 5 people saying, hey, just thinking about you, and never do it again, that's not that helpful. Just like going to the gym once isn't necessarily going to be helpful. Going every day for 6 years, that's life changing. And so consistency is really important. From then, A is aggregate. One of the challenges we face these days is we have relationships in so many different places, LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and one email account and our calendar and our phone and some random Excel spreadsheet over there. So we need to be able to pull all of our relationships into one place. That's usually where having a CRM comes into play. From there, it's about prioritizing your relationships, not necessarily organizing them into logical buckets, but really thinking about what your goals are and how do I prioritize my relationships around the people that can help me with those goals. From there, investigate, gaining intelligence on those relationships. So when it comes time to add value, you're not just following up and staying top of mind, but you're actually showing that you care about them and investing in that relationship. Finally, the last L is for leverage. Anything you can do to allow you to kind of spin that wheel over and over again, like having email templates ready to go, or having if you want to send out books to your contacts, having a bunch of books in pre-addressed envelopes ready to go and send out. Those are the kind of things that you can do.
You missed T and A though, because you went intelligence. Gather intelligence. What's T?
I've said this too many times.
You said it?
Yeah. So CAPI. Okay. Then T is for timely engagement. Making sure that you're acting on a regular, you're acting on some kind of regular cadence.
Got it.
Whether it's relying on triggers, making sure that you're following up every 90 days, or looking for those opportunities to reach out, like someone just changed jobs, or you saw an interesting post on Facebook or an article that made you think about them. The last A is for adding value, which I talked to. So I think I just skipped over that.
Okay. No, this is great. I mean, that's a lot. No, it's kind of funny when you talked about like investigate. There was like this little widget that I got, which basically before you write an email or I think it's like when somebody calls you, it actually pulls up like the person's like social media, and so like they'll call you like, oh, well, there's some pictures that him in Italy, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I was on trip in Italy, right? Like it's kind of like that.
Yeah,
right?
and so there's so much. Obviously, there's so much. We wrote a book about it, but you know, there's so much you can do kind of with strategies like that. Even one of the things that we often talk about when it comes to gaining intelligence is, you know, even just simply like paying attention, you know, to what you're actually hearing and making sure that you know to it, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, for example, Brian, like you and I were talking about, you know, how you have 2 kids, 11 and 13. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's useful information. You know, if I wanted to send you a thank you gift for now, I could think, all right, what gifts would, you know, 11 and 13-year-olds want?
15-year-olds is like
15-year-olds, okay.
Xbox.
There you go, okay.
Xbox games.
You're really upping it, okay. Or you know, that you're going to Hawaii, so okay, like, you know, maybe I can send you a suggestion for something to do in Hawaii. And those are things that, like, again, when you hear small talk, it usually goes in one ear out the other. But if you actually, like, you know, kind of, you know, take a couple extra seconds to actually note it, that's the kind of stuff that can help you build a deeper relationship with the people you care about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's really interesting because, like, in terms of, I mean, you know, we're meeting hundreds of people, probably like hundreds of thousands of people that we meet in our lifetime, right? Probably 100,000. That's
yeah. My database has 40,000 people in it.
40,000. Okay. Yeah. So okay. Well, you're halfway there. But so how do you like how do you maintain this relationship? Because it says like you know, according to studies, intimate relationships are limited to 5, right? So like that you would say, oh, it's my best friend, right? Or my wife, or it's limited to 5, and then. But most people professionally can handle, it says 50 to 150.
Yeah,
right?
so there's, you know, there are a couple of interesting things about that. So yeah, that 150 number, Robin Dunbar in the 80s, surveyed British households and looked at the average number of Christmas cards that they were sending out and using that as a proxy for the number of relationships that, you know, a human being had. And they found is on average, you know, the human being can maintain around 150 relationships at any point in time. Which is crazy when you think about the number of people that we're connecting with on a daily basis, which is no surprise that, you know, why this is more and more relevant these days is that we're connected to more and more people than ever before. Yet, you know, when Cigna, the health insurance company, surveyed 20,000 Americans, over 50% identified as being lonely, right? And that most Americans these days actually identify as not having a best friend anymore, right? And I think it's because, you know, with technology, we're going a mile wide, but an inch deep. And so that's where I think we need to be much more intentional around the relationship building. Mm-hmm. And so that's honestly the reason why, you know, Contactually exists. You know, if Dunbar's number, you know, didn't exist and it was actually instead like, you know, 500 or 1,000 or 40,000, great. And there are some people, like, you know, there's something called highly superior autobiographical memory. And I remember someone I knew in college could literally go around a room like this and give personal identifying details about every single one of you, even if he only met you once or twice. Most of us don't have that, and that's why we need like tools, processes, and systems to be able to be strategic around that.
You know, it's interesting. We had Dr. Vince Cerf as a guest here, and he was like, we were talking about like some of the future tools out there, and he was like, oh, Google Glasses. Like one of the best applications for that would be you wear it and then you'll see people that'll tell you exactly who they are and like they'll tell you like in real time. But I mean, obviously,
and that's what we're getting to, right? I mean, even like you brought up, like, you know, there are a number of tools, including Contactually, that, you know, you pop up an email client and, you know, a little sidebar pops up with, you know, all these notes and anything, any identifiable information. I mean, that's kind of like a more simplified version of Google Glass. So it's not necessarily going to be too far out that, you know, we can be, you know, meeting with someone and that, you know, at some point in somewhere, you know, there's going to be information, you know, available to us, you know, at our fingertips.
So without technology, we can maintain 150 like professional connections. With technology, what do you think that number is?
I mean, potentially
1,000.
I mean, then the upper bound becomes like how many people could we actually like engage with time-wise, which is a big problem that we run into at Contactually. So we definitely have people who will take a database like mine, 40,000 people, and say, I want to stay in touch with everyone once a month. Well, good luck, because if you send out, even if you like send out, one email campaign to 40,000 people saying, hey, Brian, it's been great to see you. I'd love to follow up. Well, what happens if 1,000 of them respond? Then you have 1,000 more conversations that you have to have in addition to your day job. And so, one of the concepts that, again, even with technology, opening up our bounds, Jason Gaynard, in the book talks about addition by subtraction. The more people you take out of your network, the more you can focus on the right relationships. Okay. And that's why we talk at Contactually, as you think about relationships being more important, there should be fewer and fewer of those. If you should have like 50 legends or 100 players, and other things like that.
In the book, you had said something. The challenge is to continually refresh important old ones and proactively add key new ones on a regular basis. And that kind of then you go into saying recommend setting aside some time each week for networking. I remember hearing one VC, at a startup grad event actually, and he said, "Oh, we don't look at startups where entrepreneurs are always like going out to network events." Like,
yeah, I mean, there's definitely
kind of weird, right?
There's definitely, I mean, there's a lot of gray area, right? Because those same VCs will say, hey, like, could I cold email you? Like, no, you have to have someone in my network, introduce us, right? So networking is very important. I think, yes, you can definitely waste an incredible amount of time networking. I definitely did early on. I still do these days. I'm not perfect. I go to networking events or conferences and collect business cards, and the next time I see those business cards is when I'm fishing them out of the back pocket of my pants, having run through the wash. That happens to all of us. I think it's a balance of all of those. But the truth is, and this is something that we keep harping and has been harped to us, is you should always be emphasizing your time more around preaching to your own choir, focusing on the relationships you already have, rather than spending so much time going out and getting new ones.
Actually, what I really like about what you had mentioned, you said relationships are kind of like a portfolio. So like, how you have your stocks, a portfolio, there's going to be winners and losers, right? And so kind of explain that to us.
Yeah, and this is definitely one of the ickier parts that, and we had to dedicate some time talking about it, that when we start thinking about our relationships as investments and winners and losers, then we start to think about like, oh, am I really calling people? Like, am I really trying to use people for business? And this is where we have to be careful because, again, people do business with people they know, and it works both ways. So we should seek to work with people that we care about and we want to be successful. We don't want just the dollars out of their pocket, and vice versa. They should care about us and want us to be successful too. So that's why it's natural to want to build a relationship. And so, yeah, I mean, if we believe that relationships are our most important asset, which I definitely do, and I'm sold on that for the rest of my life. Well, assets, just like the dollars in our bank account, need strategies and processes to be able to invest and grow that asset. Because just like, again, the dollars in your bank account, you could completely ignore it and you can watch it go down, or you could put your strategies in place and you can watch it rise.
So I have a few more questions before we open up the Q&A, and because we're running out of time here. You're a big DC tech guy. And you went to 500 startups. You could have stayed out in San Francisco. I mean, I understand, in a mattress for 4 months. Like literally, that was it. And then you went back to work in 18 hours. Why did you decide to build a company here in DC versus New York or Silicon Valley?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's no right or wrong answer. And I'm not necessarily, I'll be honest, I'm not necessarily like, rah goes DC tech, every company should be based in DC forever and ever and ever. I think it's a choice. Definitely for us, it was incredibly helpful, not only just because myself and my two co-founders just happened to like living in DC and want to stay in DC or have other reasons, whether it's family or other reasons to stay in DC. But here there's amazing talent. really great place to live. We have an office, a couple blocks away at 19th and M, which is absolutely beautiful. And you cannot get something like that in, in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. Obviously, you lose out. Yes, the funding environment is pretty weak here. So there's definitely a challenge to that. I think there's no right or wrong answer. It's about just whatever, being intentional about whatever whatever works for you and your team.
And so, I mean, now that you're in Compass and it's not survival mode, and you now have a little bit of, I should say, dry powder. Like, do you do any angel investing? Are you thinking about doing some investing? Because there's a full room of startups here. And if so, like, what are the type of startups that's sort of like your cup of tea?
To be honest, I have already been investing in a couple of companies of more people that I know. It's not something that I'm actively doing right now. Honestly, I'm focused on making Compass successful. I'll be honest, clearly, yes, this was a successful acquisition. All investors made money. This was, and I checked with my co-founders too. This was kind of a hey, wire hits the bank, and you think, oh my God, this is it. This was the greatest experience, and turned out it was just absolutely nothing. I opened up my bank account, looked at it, changed my password for security purposes, and closed it, and that's it. And I kind of been back to work since then. So yeah, I mean, for me, I'll give this, I think my criteria moving forward would be the same thing that I advise entrepreneurs on when they're asking me for advice about fundraising. Investors invest in the horse, the track, or the jockey, which means they're investing in the company you built, the track, the market that you're operating in, or the jockey. For me, I almost always invest in the jockey, right? Just, I believe in really great people. I remember the first, after receiving dozens and dozens of no's, the first investor who said yes, who actually happens to be a local investor, literally said to me, I don't know what your company does, I don't really understand your market, but I believe in you, and I think you'll figure it out. I still remember those words today. I remember where I was when I heard that because I broke down crying. And so for me, I will always invest primarily in the team.
Mm-hmm. That's really amazing. So we'll open up to Q&A. So anybody have a question? We'll do this for about 5 minutes. Okay, there you go. Your name?
Hi, thank you for talking to us today. I'm Josh Colin. And my question is sort of about your transformation as a leader throughout this whole process. So obviously starting doing everything, and once you grow the team, now you're okay, I actually have to lead a bunch of people, not put them in the right places. And now you're with Compass. So how's your role leader change throughout that whole process?
Yeah, so Josh, you're asking about kind of my leadership style or transformation. I will say, I never considered myself a leader. I never considered myself a people manager. That wasn't necessarily what I set out to do. Before Contactually, the biggest team I'd run was 6 full-time people. SkivaSarts, we had about 50 people, but they were all contractors. So I very much kind of glommed on to this concept of servant leadership, which is basically pretty simple. You hire really great people, you make sure everyone's aligned on the goals, and do whatever you can to support them, which I think is a very natural thing for someone who doesn't necessarily consider themselves, a leader, kind of, running in, head first kind of things. And honestly, I never really considered myself a leader. I always felt very comfortable. I definitely had imposter syndrome for a number of years, and it wasn't until I forget what year, but we hired, we made the call to hire an executive coach for me. Because we are at the point where it was worth kind of the $15K investment or something like that, and they did a 360 survey, and the most profound thing that came out of it, I still remember to this day, is that everyone surveyed in that 360 referred to me as their leader, right? Which is crazy, and it was at that point that I'm like, oh wow, that means they think of me as that, not oh yes, Zvi's just kind of the guy running this until we find someone better. So maybe there's still people who feel like that. But that was definitely a big transformation. And since then, obviously, I've invested a lot more in leadership skills.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Hitesh from India. Curious to know how you dealt with the investor saying no to you. Did you change your business strategy according to investors, or did you change your product according to investors? How do you play with it? Because hearing no hurts, it still does, but how do you react to it? Do you say, okay, thank you, or you change something in the business plan or in the business model?
Yeah, so how did we respond to rejections,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, I think we knew that a lot of investors were gonna say no. That was kind of no surprise. We spent a lot of time trying to understand necessarily like why. And so we really relied a lot on, getting a rejection, understanding why, making the small like pivot or change, not in our strategy, but necessarily like how we pitched it. That was a hugely helpful thing for us. Again, investors will say no for, any number of reasons, and, sometimes completely illogical. And so we learned not to take it too personally. It was just, hey, we just kind of, weren't the right fit, and that's completely okay. So.
Okay, next, last question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Anar, and as an entrepreneur, I'm sure that people are also thinking about the money question. So, when you sold, how much was it? And is it confidential? I mean, obviously, if it is, then it's probably not a good question. But also a question about your co-founders. When you started, how did you deal with the agreement of how it's going to be in the future? So, this type of issues.
Yeah. So Anar, as to the first question in terms of like the acquisition details, that's something that Compass for again whatever reason they decided the details aren't released. What I can say is, and I'm very proud of, is that every investor, every shareholder made money through the transaction, which is great. And like that's something that I've learned like isn't necessarily the case. So pay very close attention to your cap table and how it transforms, because I know a lot of people, a lot of founders who have sold their companies for tens or sometimes even hundreds of millions of dollars and walk away penniless. And that unfortunately happens pretty often, despite what you read in TechCrunch. As for like how we kind of divided up things with my co-founders, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. It's an open conversation in terms of like what each of us was bringing to the table, how we felt we'd participate. That is one thing that as much as you try and keep costs low, I cannot recommend enough, and I've seen it happen in bad ways before. Work with a lawyer and make sure that kind of those fundamental legal arrangements between co-founders are really firmly locked in. Another thing that we didn't do, but like luckily turned out all right, was even subjecting all of us co-founders to vesting. Right? Because you theoretically could have, decide you're going to start the company, split it 50-50, and then a month later, one co-founder walks away and they have 50% of the company. So vesting becomes incredibly important. It actually wasn't until we raised our seed round that our seed investor looked at our docs and were like, wait, you guys don't have any vesting among yours? Idiots. Right? No, we're going to fix that now. And I'm thankful for it. Again, it turned out not to be an issue at all, but it's kind of these things that, again, working with a really good lawyer early on can make a big difference.
Cool. So we have two last questions. So if you can go back 10 years ago, what would be the single most important piece of advice you would have given yourself?
Focus is one of the most powerful tools that you have. You have limited time on earth, limited capital. The more you can focus and figure out what you need to focus on, the better you'll do.
Mm-hmm. And then one last question, because we always ask everybody, all of our speakers, who is your favorite superhero or historical figure and why?
Yeah, I really struggle with this. I'm not good. I wasn't a superhero comic book kid growing up. Not too many historical figures really stand out. So I'm going to say, I think, for me, the one superhero that I feel like, was just really knocked out of the park was Batman, but very specifically Christian Bale's Batman, because none of the other weird ones, and God knows what Ben Affleck was doing kind of in the past couple. I didn't even bother watching the more recent one, but I think you saw kind of like that human side of things, and I think that relates a lot to founders these days. That you see a lot of founders and everyone thinks they're superheroes like, Elon Musk, for example. Everyone thinks like, oh, I want to be like Elon Musk. And then kind of, you dig in. I remember him being on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he said like, a lot of people don't, like, you would not want to be me, right? And I think that's kind of, equates to like kind of that whole Christian Bale Batman character.
Well, thank you for coming out. Ladies and gentlemen, Zvi Band.
Thanks for having me.